Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and welcome to our discussion in Chapter 7 of Natural Law and Human Rights as a part of our ethical study. And this is a very important piece of what we do in this course. So I want to take a little bit of time to discuss some things with you. I made the statement, I think, yesterday in thinking about thinking that it was a fairly new idea for human beings to think about thinking until we get into the Enlightenment of the 17th and 1800s. And there you'll have many people that wrote a lot of great things about basic human rights, what it means to be human, how different we were from the animal kingdom. And instead of us being just another animal, that we are thinking beings, that we are rational beings, that we use reason in order to make our decisions. Most famous document probably from that period was in 1775 when Thomas Jefferson and his compatriots were sitting together to discuss a Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, who had been their ruler for forever. And so it took some time to think through the idea of leaving what you knew for what you did not know. And then after that was over and America had won its independence, then they had to think through where were we going from there. Because see, in 1776, one of the most interesting things about that was that it was a new thing. They called it the Great Experiment, if you would, because no one was sure that the American government would work because no one had ever tried it before. A government of the people, by the people, for the people, where it was quite a big trial for these men to put together. And they were very brilliant men. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration in 1775, declaring that we were going to be free from England, he talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those become the very core of what we think of as human beings. But we particularly want to talk about and concentrate today in this talk on what it meant to be, what it meant to have natural rights and human rights. We hear that term quite often, but we don't see it applied quite nearly as often. The concept of natural law is based on the idea that certain principles are inherent in human nature, and therefore we can discover those by means of our human reason. These principles are considered to be universal. They are used to create a set of moral and legal standards that should be applicable to everyone. We've already talked about the fact that there are many different things go into our moral standards that we put together and seek to understand what life is really like. But there must be some standard in there somewhere that is applicable to everyone, not just based on a religion, not just based on a culture, a language, an ethnicity of people, but there must be some common elements that should be widely applied to all people. Human rights are a set of principles that are considered to be inherent in all human beings, regardless of their nationality or their ethnicity or their culture. Therefore, when we talk about natural law, we're talking about a theory that provides the foundation of human rights, as it argues that these rights are grounded in the very nature of human beings. We're unlike the other animals on the planet. We do think, we do reason, we do consider the things that we have around us, the world that's in us, and we communicate and we think about things, and we spend time doing our best to understand the world that we live in and make some sense of it, more so than other animals might do on the planet. So therefore, natural law theory provides this foundation for international law, as it argues that these laws should be based on universal principles rather than on the interest of individual nations. I think I mentioned to you yesterday the fact that we have recently this week seen orders or a warrant issued for Vladimir Putin, who is the head of the Russian nation, for his war crimes committed in Ukraine by kidnapping children in Ukraine and taking them back to Russia. And so there is a world court in The Hague, in Brussels, that will call these people to account for their deeds, and they will be sentenced based upon the international ethic or the international law that we have put together in an ethical way through the years. There are a lot of key thinkers when we think about natural law, and Cicero probably was one of the first ancient Greek philosopher who believed that natural law was based on the idea of universal reason and that it could be discovered through the use of human reason, that you could think through and come to understand these things because you didn't need a course, you didn't have to have somebody write a textbook, but you could literally look at things and realize that there has to be a system that makes sense that applies to everyone. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s, who was a Roman Catholic theologian, argued that natural law was based on the idea that God had created the universe with a certain purpose and that human beings were created with a specific nature, which was reflected in their moral and their legal obligations. Now, think about that for a moment. It's much more from the standpoint that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, that we are different, that we are not just an animal on the planet, but that God created us with that particular inward sense that we desired freedom, wanted freedom, worked for freedom, and that we had certain rights that were instilled within us. Another philosopher was John Locke, who was very famous. He actually wrote in my home state of South Carolina the first constitution for the first settlement in South Carolina in Charleston, because he was secretary to Lord Ashley, one of the Lord proprietors who Charles II gave the land to set up a colony there. John Locke argued that natural law was based on the idea that human beings have certain natural rights that are inherent in their nature, and that these rights should be protected by the government. Think for a moment, if you will, the comments by Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths that all men should be able to look for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That these truths, that these facts, that these laws are a part of the weaving of the human person, and that they're inbound in everyone, no matter where they are in the world, no matter what they're doing, what their ethnicity, their language, their education is. There is that spark within them that realizes that they are particular people. I think I mentioned yesterday as well that one of the things we attribute in the first beginnings to the Israelites was that they believed in a linear history, that there's a past, a present, a future, and the uniqueness of the human being and their time on this planet, that we're uniquely ordered by God to be here and to be involved and to be thinking and working and producing things on the planet. When we think about the word teleology, it's the study of the purpose or the design in nature. It may be a part of your ethic that you believe in a divine design, that you believe there's a God of whatever form he may take or she may take. But teleology is the word that defines that the purpose or design of nature, and that natural law is related to that design because it argues that human beings have a specific nature and purpose that is reflected in their moral and their legal obligations. You and I, when we live together as human beings, we're not like other animals that live in a pack, but we do have obligations and duties that we perform to each other, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Therefore, natural law is based on the idea that human beings have a special teleos. We have a special design. We have a special purpose that can be discovered through reason. You do that every day. You're a student, I'm assuming, that you're taking this class. You're a student in this class. So you have a particular goal. You have a design. You have a purpose. You feel like you want to be whatever, a nurse, a doctor, a veterinarian, a vet tech, whatever it is. That seems to be your teleos. That is your particular design. You're working towards that. And we live with that reality every day. The essence of human nature and natural law argues that natural laws are human beings have a specific nature that is reflected in their moral and legal obligations. This nature is based on the idea that human beings have certain inherent characteristics such as reason and free will that are essential to their nature. We are not slaves. We're not forced to abide by anybody's understanding than our own. And so that's one of the things that even our country was founded upon, that all men are created equal. That was the words of Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address, that we know that all men are created equal. We didn't always live like that. We didn't always live up to the words. We've always had some great documents, and those documents, sometimes we had to work on the ground to make us realize those. That was true with women, true with slaves and African Americans. It's been true now with gay people, that we have to work through these things to see rights on the ground. Natural law argues against relativism. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, that being relative, that everything is relative, are different for everybody. Natural law would argue against that, saying that natural law says that relativism is based on the idea that there are certain universal moral and legal precepts that are applicable to all people. Relativism says that it's different, it can be different for everybody, that there are no common rules, no common grounds. And so natural law says, no, that's not so. There are certain things that should be true for everybody, regardless of their culture, their religion, or their ethnicity. A theorist in natural law argues that these principles can be discovered through reason, are based on the nature of human beings, and therefore would argue that moral relativism is false because it denies the existence of these universal principles and leads to moral and legal chaos. I think our best example of that would be in our own world that we live in today. When we look around us and we see that there is pretty much chaos, because we have probably since the 90s have gone into this relativism idea that there's no absolutes in the world. And because there's no absolutes, every man can do that which is right in his own eyes. And that will destroy a society. We have seen that really since the 1980s. And I can say that having been a pastor for 20 years and having been a watcher of human nature, to realize when we change from these moral absolutes to this relative idea that, well, everybody just do what you want to do. You're a free moral agent. You don't have to conform to any kind of standards. There are no moral things that everybody has to keep up. And look what we have. We have shootings in our schools today where children are killed. We have gun violence almost on a daily basis. This is in America. This is not in Russia. This is not in Europe. It's in America. In almost every state of the union, we've had children killed in our schools, which speaks to us of the problem of our culture. We're talking about ethics being a foundation of what makes our culture what it is. And when we do not when we abandon any kind of foundation, then we end up with the chaos that we live in. And we are in political chaos today. I mean, we had banks failing last week. We've had water shortages. We have climate change. The chaos the world is in can all go back to this idea of abandoning the things that we held that made us great. It was interesting that the Romans went on for 1,500 years, and then within 75 years, they collapse and disappear. Democracy is no different from that. We're very well on our path to probably destruction if we don't find a leader that can turn us around. And sadly, we don't have any of those on the forefront. But when we think about natural law, we're actually thinking about those foundational leaders in the beginning, like John Locke, or like Thomas Jefferson, like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, James Madison, all the great men, many of them we call founding fathers of our nation. They were thinking about the very thing that you'll be reading about in this chapter. So be sure that you read it carefully so that you can understand what they were thinking about when it came to human rights, that we guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that we create a place where people can come and live by moral standards. It's interesting that our founding fathers thought moral standards were the secret to a country surviving, that you had to have morality, you had to have characteristics that built up a society. You could not have people in public life in our positions of power that lied, as a way of life, or that cheated, or that stole, or that got rich off the people. But you had men. Thomas Jefferson viewed America as being a place where farmers would come together 2 or 3 months a year, transact the country's business, go back to their farms. All these little yeoman farmers around the country. The country would be very different than what he envisioned, and yet that's what he looked for and hoped for. So I hope you'll read this chapter with some attention. Look at the slides. Also, be sure you're listening to the TED Talks that you have. These are not long. They're maybe 15 minutes, but you get to hear from different voices than my own or the textbook. And you get to consider some things that maybe you wouldn't consider otherwise. You certainly will get to hear from people that you probably wouldn't heard from otherwise. You can hear from the Pope. You can hear from the Dalai Lama, great our Buddhist monks and Muslim imams, all kind of people, because we're all in this together. We talk about this in the first chapter of this study. How do we all function together with so many different beliefs and so many different religions and so many different ideas? How do we come together to form a society where we can all just get along and understand? Well, it comes back to finding these moral absolutes that are non-negotiable. We cannot surrender our freedom. That's a non-negotiable. We cannot give up our right to the free press, be able to address error. That is a non-negotiable. We cannot give up, even though we see this in the news. They're trying to force us to change our teaching and not teach the history as it was. That is a non-negotiable, because the people who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. Okay, tomorrow we'll have another talk. I hope that some things that we've said today will spur your attention. I think it will as you read the chapter. Maybe will help you to understand more about what you're reading. We'll see you tomorrow.